Inside Louisiana's Angola Prison, there is a place many people never see and few understand. It's where the final phase of a sentence unfolds after every appeal is exhausted, a space defined by waiting, reflection, and the slow approach of the unknown. In this documentary, we step inside that reality. We follow the routines, the institutional structure, and the inner worlds of men living through the last stage of life on death row. No dramatics, no sensationalism, just the quiet truth of a system, a place, and the people inside it, as the long walk begins long before any final day arrives. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The story doesn't begin on a final day or with a final walk. It begins at a quieter moment, the point when the legal process reaches its limit, and an inmate learns that the last appeal has failed. Inside Angola's death row, that moment does not look dramatic from the outside. There are no loud reactions, no cinematic scenes. Instead, it unfolds through routine, a notice delivered, a conversation with a lawyer, a short exchange through steel bars, and then silence. From that point forward, life changes, but not all at once. The schedule remains the same. The doors open and close at the same hours. The voices in the hallway sound familiar, but the meaning of every day shifts. Time no longer stretches forward without a clear endpoint. It begins to narrow. Men describe this stage in different ways through letters, testimony, and written reflections. Some explain it as a tightening of perspective. Others call it a slow acceptance. A few turn inward and detach emotionally, creating distance between themselves and the reality ahead. The institution itself does not pause. Angola is structured, orderly, and controlled. Movement is limited. Security remains the priority. Staff follow procedures designed to maintain stability and predictability, because predictability reduces tension. Cells remain confined spaces, with little room for personal items beyond essentials. Voices echo across the corridor, but much of daily life is quiet, measured, and restrained. For many men, this period becomes a time of intense reflection. Some revisit their case records, even when the legal process is effectively over. Others write letters to family, to faith leaders, or to no one in particular, simply to organize their thoughts. Faith plays a role for some, especially in a place where chaplains and volunteer ministers have long been present. Services and private conversations offer structure. Not everyone turns to religion, and not every story follows the same path, but belief often becomes a framework for understanding what lies ahead. There is also another form of coping, emotional withdrawal. A few former inmates describe creating distance between themselves and the outside world, limiting phone calls and visits to protect loved ones from the emotional strain of the final phase. This isn't dramatic, it's quiet, gradual, and deeply personal. Some people value connection, others reduce it. Both responses exist side by side in the same hallway. Routine becomes a stabilizing force. Days are shaped by predictable patterns, counts, meals, limited recreation, and long hours inside the cell. Men structure time in private ways, reading, writing, thinking, or simply observing the slow passage of hours across the concrete floor. The environment reinforces consistency. Metal, concrete, motion-controlled doors, fluorescent lighting, and the steady presence of officers moving along the corridor. Everything is deliberate. Everything is controlled. From the institutional perspective, this stage is also administrative. Documents continue to move through official channels. Dates are discussed, scheduled, modified, or challenged. Lawyers may still file motions, even when chances are minimal. Staff monitor behavior closely, ensuring that stress does not escalate into conflict. The priority is order, but the emotional reality beneath that order remains complex. Conversations during this period often shift inward. Some men begin to reflect on the past. Choices, relationships, childhood experiences, or moments that shape their lives. Others avoid reflection entirely, focusing instead on the present moment and the immediate environment of the cell. There is no single pattern. The experience is shaped by personality, belief, history, and the way each person processes fear, accountability, or inevitability. The phrase, "the long walk," is sometimes used to describe the final movement from cell to chamber. But here its meaning changes. The long walk begins earlier, in thought, in routine, and in the mental distance between one stage of life and the next. It unfolds slowly across weeks or months, not minutes. And much of it happens alone, within the quiet space of a cell that remains unchanged even as the future becomes unavoidable. At the same time, Angola itself carries a long institutional memory. The prison has operated for generations, and its culture reflects both its past and its present. Officers, chaplains, legal advocates, and volunteers all witness different sides of this process. Some approach it with formality, others with reserved empathy. The environment remains professional, procedural, and restrained. Even when the human experience inside, it is deeply emotional. Family relationships take on a different weight as well. Phone calls may become more intentional. Letters may grow longer or shorter. Some families stay closely involved, visiting when possible and offering support. Others struggle with distance, conflict, or unresolved history. These dynamics shape how inmates experience the final phase. For many, the connection to the outside world remains one of the few links beyond the cell walls. Throughout this chapter of the journey, one theme remains constant: the coexistence of routine and finality. Every door that closes sounds the same as it always has. Every count follows the same schedule. But each day carries a new awareness that time is no longer open-ended, and that life is moving toward a defined point on the horizon. This stage is not dramatic. It is measured, quiet, and structured. It unfolds through repetition, reflection, and the steady rhythm of prison life. And it marks the true beginning of the long walk, not as a physical path, but as a mental passage shaped by time, policy, belief, and the human need to find meaning when certainty replaces hope. Life on death row after the final appeal is not defined by sudden changes. It unfolds through routine, the same doors, the same movements, the same narrow schedule repeating day after day. But in this stage, routine takes on a different meaning. It becomes both a stabilizing framework and a constant reminder of time passing inside a system that does not stop. Every morning begins in much the same way. Lights rise. Officers move through the corridor. Count is conducted with precision and consistency. The process is formal, procedural, and without excess emotion. The sound of footsteps, the rhythm of keys, and the click of metal locks form the background of daily life. Nothing about the environment is accidental. Predictability reduces uncertainty. Structure keeps the unit steady. Inside the cell, space is limited and carefully regulated. A bed fixed to the wall, a small desk surface, or concrete ledge. Personal items kept minimal. Books, letters, legal papers, each one monitored and controlled through policy. The environment is not meant to change often. Stability is part of the design, and that design shapes how men experience time. For many, routine becomes a coping tool. The day is divided into segments: waking, cleaning the small space, reading, writing, moments of quiet reflection, limited movement, and the repetition of institutional processes. A structured day creates order in an uncertain future. Some inmates build personal schedules, not because the system requires it, but because structure offers psychological balance. Others experience the routine differently. The repetition can feel heavy. The same walls, the same shadows, the same sounds echoing through the hallway. Time stretches and compresses at once. Hours feel long, yet weeks pass quickly. The calendar matters, but it also blurs. Men describe this as life lived inside a narrow frame, where change happens slowly and most of it occurs internally rather than in the physical world around them. Communication remains limited and purposeful. Letters serve as a connection to the outside, to family members, legal advocates, or people who have followed the case. Calls and visits, when available, carry emotional weight. Conversations are often thoughtful and measured. Some families remain closely involved. Others struggle with distance or unresolved history. These relationships shape how each person moves through the final period of waiting. From the institutional standpoint, professionalism defines daily interactions. Officers maintain distance while carrying out duties. The focus is on safety, order, and consistency. The environment is neither expressive nor emotional. It is procedural and controlled. In this stage, even small disruptions are managed carefully because stability benefits everyone in the unit. Some men turn toward reflection during this time. They write about their past, their experiences, or how they understand their present reality. Others focus on faith or philosophical thought. Chaplains, volunteers, and counselors may offer structured conversation or quiet support, depending on availability and circumstance. Not every inmate engages in these activities, and not every story follows the same path, but opportunities for reflection can shape how individuals understand the passage of time. There is also a practical dimension to daily life. Legal paperwork may still move forward, even when outcomes appear unlikely. Motions are reviewed. Deadlines appear. Conversations with attorneys continue, sometimes cautiously, sometimes with determination. The process remains technical and procedural, and for some men, engaging with it offers purpose, even when expectations are limited. In the background, the institution functions with large-scale continuity. Angola is both a place of confinement and a workplace for hundreds of staff members. Operations continue with precision: security checks, movement schedules, administrative reviews. The system must operate smoothly regardless of individual circumstances. That reality can feel distant and impersonal, but it is central to the environment. Within this structure, personal meaning becomes something inmates build themselves. Some focus on memory. Some concentrate on routine discipline, keeping the cell orderly, exercising in confined space, reading to maintain focus. Others retreat inward and limit emotional engagement. These responses are different, but they share one underlying truth. Each person is navigating the same environment in a way that helps them maintain balance. Time feels different here than it does in the outside world. It is measured not by freedom of movement or changing scenery, but by sound, light, and repetition. The closing of doors. The shift between day and night lighting. The echo of voices down a long corridor. The steady awareness that life is moving forward inside a controlled space. This stage is not dramatic, but it is deeply human. It is built from small decisions: how to think, how to remember, how to relate to others, how to fill the hours of the day. The institution provides structure. The individual provides meaning within that structure. And as time moves forward, the long walk continues quietly, shaped less by motion than by thought, routine, and the steady presence of a system that does not pause. As time continues forward in the final stage of life on death row, the world outside remains distant, while the world inside the mind becomes increasingly present. This chapter of the journey is shaped less by movement and system structure, and more by reflection, memory, and the ways individuals confront their own thoughts in a confined space. The environment does not change, but the meaning of that environment deepens as inmates look inward and process their lives piece by piece. Reflection does not arrive all at once. It comes slowly, sometimes in quiet moments between routine tasks, sometimes during long stretches of silence when the hallway is still and the only sound is the faint echo of distant movement. In this space, the past becomes something that is revisited carefully, sometimes intentionally, and sometimes because thoughts surface on their own without invitation. Some men write as a way to organize those thoughts. Pages of personal notes, letters, or journal-style reflections help structure memory into words. The writing is often practical rather than poetic, a way to process events, relationships, and turning points across a lifetime. Memory becomes a working space, not for dramatic storytelling, but for honest self-examination, whether that means regret, acceptance, uncertainty, or unresolved questions. Others revisit memories privately without writing them down. Moments from childhood, early friendships, family relationships, or major life decisions come back into focus. These memories are layered. Some are comforting, others are difficult. The enclosed space of the cell creates an environment where there are few distractions, and that makes reflection feel inevitable. Time allows thoughts to return repeatedly, each time with slightly different meaning. For some individuals, reflection is tied to belief. Faith traditions, spiritual readings, or conversations with chaplains become frameworks through which memory and identity are examined. These interactions are often calm and structured. They do not resolve every question, but they offer language for understanding life experiences and the reality of the present moment. Not everyone turns toward belief, and not every person interprets faith the same way, but for many, it becomes an anchor for emotional stability. There are also those who keep reflection limited and guarded. Instead of revisiting the past, they remain focused on the immediate present, the cell, the routine, the next hour of the day. This is not avoidance in a dramatic sense. It is a deliberate choice to stay grounded in what can be controlled. For some, maintaining emotional distance from memory is a protective measure. It helps reduce stress in an environment where mental balance is essential. The inner world is shaped not only by personal thought, but also by the rare and carefully structured conversations that occur during this period. Letters from family or friends may spark new reflections. Old relationships resurface through written words. Even brief exchanges through a cell door or during scheduled communication can shift how a person thinks about the past and the present. These interactions are limited, but their emotional impact can be significant. Some families remain a consistent presence, offering support and connection. Others experience tension, uncertainty, or years of silence. These differences influence how inmates process memory. For some, reflection includes gratitude for relationships that continue despite distance and circumstance. For others, it includes unresolved emotions that remain difficult to reconcile. Within the institutional environment, reflection happens in parallel with structure and procedure. Officers continue their duties. Schedules remain precise. The system functions according to policy. In contrast, the inner world operates quietly and independently. No one else can fully see how a person processes memory or experiences reflection. It is a private landscape inside a public institution. There is also a wider understanding that the prison itself is layered with history. Angola has a long past, and the environment carries traces of countless lives that have moved through its gates. That awareness shapes reflection as well. Some inmates think about their place within that larger story, not to dramatize their experience, but to place it within a broader context of time, place, and institutional continuity. Reflection during this stage is not always heavy or somber. At times, it involves small moments of appreciation, a familiar sound in the hallway, light through a narrow window, or a memory that brings a sense of calm. These moments do not change the situation, but they provide emotional grounding. They serve as reminders that even within strict control and confinement, the human mind continues to search for meaning and stability. At other times, reflection can feel uncertain. Questions remain unanswered. Emotions shift from day to day. The passage of time is steady, but the inner experience of that time changes depending on mood, memory, and circumstance. This is part of the psychological reality of the final stage, a balance between structure on the outside and complexity on the inside. Throughout this chapter of the journey, one constant remains clear. The long walk is not only physical, it is internal. It unfolds through thought, recollection, responsibility, belief, restraint, and the quiet effort to maintain emotional footing while the future becomes more defined. The institution controls movement. The individual navigates the mind. And as days continue forward, reflection becomes both a companion and a challenge, a continual reminder that the last phase of life on death row is lived not only behind bars and within concrete walls, but also within memory, meaning, and the private conversations each person has with themselves. In the final stage of life on death row, the outside world does not disappear. It simply becomes harder to reach. The connection between the prison and the people beyond its fences remains present, but it exists through limits, delays, and carefully controlled communication. This chapter explores how relationships change in this period, and how distance, memory, and time shape the link between the men inside Angola and the families and communities outside. Contact with the outside world is structured by policy. Calls are scheduled. Letters move through official channels. Visits, when available, happen under supervision and within clear boundaries. None of these forms of communication are casual or spontaneous. They require planning, patience, and emotional restraint from everyone involved. The reality of that structure influences how relationships evolve during the final phase. For some families, communication becomes more consistent and intentional. Conversations are thoughtful and direct. Phone calls focus on updates, shared memories, and the small details of daily life that help maintain connection despite distance. Letters are written with care, not only to inform, but also to sustain a sense of presence. These interactions provide emotional grounding for both sides. They create continuity in a situation where time and uncertainty feel heavy. For others, communication remains complicated or fragile. Years of separation, unresolved conflict, or long stretches of silence may shape how, or whether, contact continues. In those cases, the final stage does not create closeness automatically. Instead, it highlights the weight of past experiences and relationships that were already difficult before this point. Some families choose distance. Some individuals inside the prison maintain emotional space to protect loved ones or themselves. Both responses exist side by side. Visits carry particular significance when they occur. The experience is structured, formal, and closely monitored, but the emotional meaning extends beyond the physical setting. The presence of a familiar voice or familiar face, even through barriers or glass, reinforces the reality that life continues beyond the prison walls. The conversations are often practical, reflective, or quietly supportive. They rarely resemble dramatic scenes. Instead, they are measured, careful, and shaped by the understanding that time together is limited. Letters play a different role. They move slowly, but they create a lasting record of connection. Words on paper can be read repeatedly, often becoming part of the small, personal archive an inmate keeps inside the cell. Some letters focus on family life, milestones, work, daily routines, and memories of the past. Others explore more personal thoughts, including reflection, forgiveness, uncertainty, or attempts to understand the distance that has grown over time. Every letter carries its own emotional history. Some men also communicate with people beyond family, legal advocates, faith leaders, or individuals who have followed their cases or corresponded through volunteer networks. These exchanges tend to be structured and purposeful. They may involve practical updates, discussions about belief, or conversations about meaning and identity in the final stage of life. While not every inmate takes part in these connections, those who do often describe them as stabilizing. The outside world continues to move forward during this time, and that can feel both grounding and distant. News from family members reflects ordinary life, school, work, health, children growing older, relatives aging, or communities changing. These stories create a sense of continuity, but they also reinforce the separation between life in confinement and life beyond the prison gates. That contrast becomes part of the emotional experience of this stage. Meanwhile, inside Angola, the institutional structure remains steady. Officers perform their duties with professionalism. Schedules, counts, and movement policies continue unchanged. The environment does not respond to the emotional weight of relationships. It remains procedural. This creates a dual reality. Human connection on one level, administrative structure on another. Individuals inside the prison learn to navigate both at the same time. Not every relationship strengthens during the final phase. Some fade quietly. Phone calls become less frequent. Letters slow or stop. Distance becomes the default rather than the exception. For those who experience this, the final stage can feel more isolated, but isolation develops gradually, not suddenly. It is shaped by years of history rather than a single moment in time. There are also moments when relationships are repaired or revisited after long periods of silence. A letter arrives unexpectedly. A relative reaches out after years apart. A conversation opens difficult subjects that were avoided in the past. These moments are not dramatic in a cinematic sense, but they carry emotional weight. They reflect how the final stage of life can prompt some people, both inside and outside, to reconsider how they relate to one another. Throughout this period, identity remains tied to both the prison environment and the outside world. An inmate may be confined within a narrow physical space, but the mind continues to move across memories, relationships, and unfinished conversations. The emotional landscape extends far beyond the cell door, even when physical movement remains tightly controlled. The balance between connection and distance is different for every person. Some hold tightly to relationships as a source of meaning and support. Others step back to protect themselves or the people they care about. Neither approach is simple. Both reflect the complexity of navigating the final stage of life under conditions where communication is limited, structured, and shaped by time. In the end, this chapter of the journey is defined not by dramatic conflict, but by quiet, deliberate effort, the effort to stay connected, to understand distance, and to find stability in relationships that continue to evolve even as the future becomes increasingly defined. The outside world remains present, but it is reached through letters, voices, glass, and memory. And within that space between presence and absence, the long walk continues. In the final stretch of the long walk, life on death row takes on a quieter and more focused shape. The system remains structured, the routines continue, and the environment does not change, but the way time is experienced becomes more defined. This stage is marked by acceptance for some, continued uncertainty for others, and a steady effort to maintain emotional balance while the future grows more specific. Acceptance in this context does not arrive as a dramatic realization. It appears gradually, often through small decisions and quiet moments. Some men begin to speak about life in practical terms, focusing on the present rather than the possibility of reversal. They organize personal belongings, review letters, and decide what to keep and what to send out of the prison. These actions are straightforward and procedural, but they carry emotional meaning beneath the surface. For others, acceptance remains complicated. Hope does not disappear entirely, even when options are limited. Attorneys may continue filing motions, reviewing records, or communicating about developments that remain uncertain. The legal system is deliberate and procedural, and in some cases, its movement extends right up to the final stages. That ongoing process can create a sense of suspension, a state where life remains balanced between possibility and inevitability. Inside Angola, the institutional structure stays consistent. Officers carry out responsibilities with professionalism. Movement is supervised, records are updated, and schedules remain orderly. Staff interaction during this period is measured and respectful, grounded in policy rather than emotion. The focus remains on safety, stability, and procedure, especially as stress and reflection deepen during the final phase. For many inmates, meaning in this period is found through reflection, faith, or personal intention. Some continue writing, sorting through experiences and ideas that have shaped their lives. Others spend more time in quiet thought, choosing calm and routine over conversation. Faith, for those who practice it, becomes a space of grounding, a way to understand identity, consequence, and the passage of time within a framework larger than the walls around them. Relationships continue to play a significant role. Calls and letters may become more intentional, with conversations focusing on closure, reassurance, or shared memory. Some families choose presence through consistent communication. Others remain distant, and that distance shapes the emotional weight of the final stage. Each situation is different, reflecting the complexity of human relationships rather than a single narrative. There is also a practical side to preparation. Papers are reviewed. Personal property is organized. Instructions may be written regarding belongings, correspondence, or final messages. These steps are administrative in appearance, but personal in meaning. They reflect an attempt to bring structure to uncertainty, to create order in an environment where so little can be controlled. Throughout this period, the physical environment remains unchanged. The cell, the corridor, the sound of metal doors, the muted light along the hallway, all of it remains familiar. That familiarity can feel steady, but it can also emphasize how little space exists for distraction. Time moves forward through repetition, and every routine feels more deliberate as the horizon becomes clearer. The emotional experience of this stage is not uniform. Some individuals approach it with calm acceptance, shaped by faith, reflection, or years of adjustment to institutional life. Others experience tension, doubt, or unresolved thoughts that shift from day to day. The inner experience remains personal and largely unseen, even within a controlled environment where every movement is recorded. Conversations with chaplains, counselors, or volunteers may continue to provide grounding. These interactions are often quiet and respectful, centered on listening rather than instruction. They create space for reflection without judgment, reinforcing the idea that meaning in this stage comes not from the institution, but from the individual navigating it. The long walk, as understood in this context, is no longer simply a phrase tied to a single moment. It represents a gradual passage, a movement through time, memory, responsibility, distance, and acceptance. It is shaped by routine, policy, and the human effort to understand life within strict boundaries. Outside the prison, life goes on in ways that feel both close and distant. Families work, study, travel, grow older, and continue experiencing the ordinary rhythms of daily life. News from beyond the walls remains a reminder that the world continues forward, even as the final stage inside the prison becomes more concentrated and defined. Inside Angola, the final stretch is not marked by spectacle or dramatic scenes. It is made up of small, steady moments, letters folded neatly on a desk, quiet reflection in a narrow space, footsteps echoing in a long corridor, the measured routine of an institution that continues operating as it always has. It is in those details that the emotional reality of the long walk becomes most visible, even when much of it remains unspoken. In the end, this chapter is about meaning, how individuals interpret the last stage of life in an environment built on structure, control, and routine. Some find clarity. Others hold questions that remain unresolved. The experience is shaped by memory, belief, relationships, and the silent effort to maintain dignity in a place designed for restraint rather than expression. And as the long walk reaches its final distance, the story remains defined not by spectacle, but by stillness, by the quiet intersection of policy, time, humanity, and the reality of a system where the journey begins long before any final moment arrives.